It's easier with your friend. The billionaire laughed and left. 3 years later, he saw her with triplets who call her Mom. Hi, my precious family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter's family. May the Almighty crown every woman with courage that never fades, with patience that glows even in pain, and with hope that rises like dawn after the darkest night. May your broken pieces become masterpieces of strength, and your scars speak of battles won, not lost. You are the rhythm of kindness, the fire that warms cold hearts, and the gentle force that rebuilds what was shattered. May your laughter echo louder than your sorrow, your faith outshine your fears, and your dreams walk boldly beside you. My beloved family, remember, your voice matters here. Every like is a light, every comment a heartbeat in this home of faith and love. This is Mission 1000 likes for every woman who was left behind yet rose again with grace. If love still lives in your heart, like this video. If faith still lights your way, comment, "I'm with Mr. Peter." The pregnancy test trembled in Usha Spence's hand like a fragile bird as she stood outside the bedroom door, listening to the man she loved destroy everything they'd built together. She'd imagined this moment so differently. Candlelight, champagne, Chris's face lighting up with joy when she told him they'd created life together. Instead, she heard her best friend's laughter floating through the crack in the door, intimate and satisfied in a way that made Usha's stomach turn. You should have seen her face when she left for that conference. Veronica's voice dripped with amusement. So trusting, so naive. She actually believed you loved her. Chris's response came after a pause that felt eternal. It's easier with you. She's always wanting more, needing more, expecting me to be something I'm not. You just let me breathe. Usha's knees buckled, but she caught herself against the wall. Through the gap, she watched Chris pull on his shirt, while Veronica stretched languidly across the sheets Usha had picked out together with him last month. Egyptian cotton, because he'd said they felt like luxury against skin. Her skin, she'd thought, not her best friend's. Are you finally going to end it? Veronica asked, running her fingers down Chris's arm with possessive familiarity that spoke of months. Not a single mistake. I don't know. Chris sat on the edge of the bed, his back to his mistress. She makes me want to be better, and I hate that feeling. Like I'm constantly failing some test I didn't sign up for. That's exhausting, baby. Veronica moved behind him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. I don't need you to be better. I like you exactly as you are, flawed, human, real. She puts you on some pedestal and then acts wounded when you can't stay up there. Usha pressed her fist against her mouth, tasting blood as her teeth cut into her lip. The penthouse stretched behind her like a museum of false memories. The kitchen where Chris had made her breakfast in bed. The living room where they danced to old jazz records. The balcony where he'd told her she was the most extraordinary woman he'd ever known. All of it poisoned now, revealed as elaborate theater, where she'd been the only one who didn't know it was all pretend. She's going to want marriage soon, Chris said quietly. Kids, the whole permanent thing. And you're not ready for that. Veronica made it a statement, not a question. I don't know if I'll ever be ready for that level of commitment. My father always said marriage was a trap for ambitious men. Maybe he was right. The pregnancy test felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in Usha's hand. She looked down at the 2 pink lines that had appeared 10 minutes ago, confirmation of the life growing inside her body, and felt something shift in her chest. Not heartbreak anymore, something colder, sharper, more dangerous. She backed away from the door, with movement so silent she might have been a ghost. The living room mocked her with its careful preparation. Candles waiting to be lit, champagne chilling in the bucket, a small gift box containing the positive test wrapped in silver paper. She'd been such a fool, believing in love stories and happy endings. Usha moved through the penthouse methodically, packing only what she'd brought into the relationship. Clothes, a few books, the emergency cash she'd kept hidden in her old jewelry box because her grandmother had taught her to always have escape money. She left behind everything Chris had bought her, the designer dresses, the jewelry, the expensive perfume. She wanted nothing that carried his claim. The bedroom door opened as she was zipping her single suitcase closed. Chris emerged wearing only his underwear, his hair disheveled, his expression shifting from satisfaction to confusion when he saw her standing there with her coat on. "Usha, I thought you weren't coming back until tomorrow. Did the conference end early?" She stared at him, memorizing every detail of his face so she'd never forget what betrayal looked like. He was beautiful in that careless way some men were, blessed with features that opened doors before he even spoke. She'd loved that face, traced it with her fingers in the early morning light, believed the promises that came from those lips. "It's easier with your friend," she said, her voice absolutely steady. "I heard you, Chris, I heard everything." His face drained of color. Behind him, Veronica appeared in a silk robe Usha recognized as her own, and the calculated innocence in her expression told Usha this moment had been orchestrated, that her best friend had wanted her to find them together. "Usha, wait!" Chris started forward, but she held up her hand. Don't you dare try to explain or apologize or do whatever it is you think will fix this." She picked up her suitcase, feeling the weight of the pregnancy test still in her pocket. "You said I expect too much from you. You're right. I expected loyalty, honesty, basic human decency. I see now how unreasonable that was. Where are you going?" He moved to block her path to the door. "We need to talk about this. You can't just leave." "Watch me." Usha stepped around him, and when he grabbed her arm, she looked down at his hand with such cold fury that he released her immediately. "Don't ever touch me again." "Usha, please." His voice cracked, and she might have felt something if she hadn't just heard him tell another woman that being with her was exhausting. "I made a mistake. We can work through this. We are not a we anymore. We never were, apparently. I was just too stupid to see it." Veronica leaned against the doorframe, watching the scene with barely concealed satisfaction. "Maybe this is for the best. You two were never really compatible anyway." Usha turned to look at the woman she'd called her best friend since college. The woman who'd been there through her parents' death, through every triumph and failure. The woman she'd trusted with her deepest secrets and biggest dreams. "I hope you're happy together. You deserve each other. Don't leave like this," Chris begged, and she saw something that might have been genuine distress in his eyes, but it was too late, far too late. "Where will you go?" "Somewhere you'll never find me." She pressed the elevator button, and when the doors opened immediately, it felt like even the universe wanted her gone from this place. "Somewhere I can forget I ever loved someone who found me exhausting. That's not what I meant." The elevator doors closed on his protests, and Usha finally let herself feel the full weight of her devastation. She placed one hand on her stomach, feeling the impossible flatness that would soon swell with evidence of the 3 children growing inside her, though she didn't know that yet. She made a silent vow to the tiny cluster of cells that would become her sons. They would never know their father, never experience the particular agony of loving someone who found you inconvenient. The lobby gleamed with expensive marble, and the night doorman greeted her with professional warmth. "Mr. Spence, can I call you a car?" "No, thank you. I'll walk." She stepped out into the city night, leaving behind the penthouse and the man, and the life she'd thought was hers. Behind her, she heard the elevator ding and Chris's voice calling her name, desperate now, as if he'd finally realized what he was losing. Usha didn't look back. She'd made that mistake once, loving a man who wasn't capable of loving her in return. She wouldn't make it again. Chapter 2. The Silent Disappearance. The studio apartment smelled like mildew and old dreams when Usha unlocked the door for the first time. But it was hers, and that was all that mattered. 3 hours outside the city where Chris lived, in a neighborhood where nobody knew her face or her story, she could finally breathe without fear of running into someone who would tell him where she'd gone. Morning sickness hit her the next day with a vengeance that left her curled around the toilet, retching up bile because she hadn't been able to keep food down since walking away from the penthouse. She deleted every social media account, changed her phone number, and withdrawn from every mutual friend's life with surgical precision. As far as Chris Scott's world was concerned, she'd simply vanished into thin air. The isolation carved hollows in her chest during those first weeks. She'd wake from dreams where her mother was still alive, where she could call home and hear comfort in a familiar voice, only to remember she was completely alone in the world now. Her parents had died when she was in college, a car accident that had stolen them both in a single moment of someone else's drunk driving. Veronica had held her through those dark days, had promised they were family now, sisters by choice if not by blood. That memory made the nausea worse. Usha found work consulting for small local companies, using her mother's maiden name to hide from her past. She'd always been good with numbers, with seeing patterns others missed, and that gift became her salvation. Her first client was a bakery run by an elderly woman named Dorothy Fleming, who'd been about to lose everything to a predatory loan. "I can't pay you much," Dorothy said, wringing her hands as she showed Usha the disaster of her accounts. "But I'll give you whatever I can. Keep your money." Usha studied the numbers, her mind already calculating solutions. "I'll take a small percentage of future profits instead. If I can't help you make more money, you don't owe me anything." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "Why would you do that?" "Because I believe in what you're building here." Usha touched the older woman's hand gently, and because someone needs to. She restructured Dorothy's entire operation over the next month, negotiating with suppliers, streamlining production, and finding wholesale opportunities nobody had thought to pursue. Within 2 months, the bakery's revenue had tripled, and Dorothy insisted on paying Usha more than their agreed percentage. "You saved my life," Dorothy said, embracing her carefully. "I'm going to tell everyone I know about you." Word spread through the community like wildfire. The brilliant consultant who worked for stakes instead of upfront fees, who believed in underdogs and impossible turnarounds. Usha's client list grew rapidly, each success building her reputation, and she worked 16-hour days because exhaustion kept her from thinking about Chris too much. At night, though, the loneliness crushed her. She'd lie in bed with one hand on her growing stomach, talking to the baby she thought she was carrying, making promises about the life they'd build together. She told her unborn child about her grandmother who'd survived segregation and built her own business when banks wouldn't loan to women who looked like her. She talked about resilience and strength and the importance of knowing your own worth. "Your father doesn't deserve to know you," she whispered into the darkness. "He made his choice, and we'll make ours." The ultrasound appointment came on a morning when Usha had been sick 6 times before noon. She'd lost weight despite the pregnancy, her clothes hanging loose on her frame, and the technician frowned as she moved the wand across Usha's stomach. "Is something wrong?" Usha gripped the edge of the examination table, her heart racing. "Not wrong exactly." The technician turned the screen toward her, pointing at 3 distinct shapes floating in the amniotic darkness. "Just unexpected. You're having triplets." The world tilted sideways. "That's not possible." "Triplets are incredibly rare. About 1 in 10,000 pregnancies." The technician smiled. "Congratulations. You're carrying 3 identical boys." Usha stared at the screen, watching 3 tiny hearts beating in perfect synchronization, and felt something enormous shift inside her soul. Not one baby to love and protect, 3. Not one reason to be strong, 3 reasons to become stronger than she'd ever imagined possible. 3 sons, she whispered, and despite everything, despite the betrayal and the loneliness and the fear, she felt a smile break across her face. "I'm going to have 3 sons." The technician printed out ultrasound photos, and Usha tucked them carefully into her purse. Walking back to her studio apartment, she passed families in the park, fathers pushing strollers, and felt the familiar ache of grief for what her children would never have. But then she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin, Because her sons would have something better than a father who found their mother exhausting. They'd have a mother who would move mountains to give them everything they deserved. That night, she made a list of names while lying in bed. Her grandfather had been called James, but everyone knew him as Jimmy. Her great-uncle Thomas had gone by Tommy, and her father's middle name had been Henry, though she'd rarely heard anyone use it. Jimmy, Tommy, and Henry, solid names, strong names, names that carried her family's history forward into a future Chris Scott would never be part of. Dorothy found her crying at the bakery the next morning and pulled her into the back office without a word. "Tell me what's wrong, baby." And Usha did, for the first time since walking out of that penthouse. She told Dorothy everything, the betrayal, the pregnancy, the triplets, the overwhelming fear that she couldn't do this alone. Dorothy listened without judgment, then took Usha's face in her flour-dusted hands. "You're not alone anymore. You've got me, and I've got a whole family who love those boys like their own. My nephew Lawrence runs an investment firm that's struggling. You should talk to him. I think you two could help each other. I don't know anything about venture capital. You know how to see potential where others don't. You know how to build something from nothing. That's exactly what Lawrence needs." Dorothy squeezed her hands. "Promise me you'll at least meet with him." Usha agreed, because saying no to Dorothy felt impossible. The meeting with Lawrence Fleming changed her life, though she didn't know it yet. He was a kind man in his 50s who'd inherited his father's firm and run it into the ground through poor choices and worse timing. "I'm drowning," he admitted, showing her his portfolio. "Everything I touch turns to disaster." Usha spent 3 sleepless weeks analyzing every investment, every decision, every missed opportunity. Her mind worked differently now, sharpened by necessity and desperation, and she saw patterns Lawrence had missed, potential he'd overlooked, ways to salvage what seemed lost. She presented him with a plan so comprehensive, he stared at her like she'd performed magic. "This is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I want to offer you a full partnership. I want 40% equity and complete control over investment decisions." Lawrence didn't even hesitate. "Done." Usha placed one hand on her swelling stomach, feeling her sons moving inside her, and smiled. Chris Scott had thrown her away like she was nothing, had chosen easy over real, had proven her love was too demanding for his comfort. She'd build something so powerful that one day he'd see what he'd lost, and it would destroy him. Chapter 3. Building an Empire on Broken Pieces. Winter arrived with brutal cold the night Usha gave birth, alone, except for nurses who moved efficiently through their duties without emotional investment. The first baby came screaming into the world at midnight, his cries fierce and demanding, and they placed him on her chest, still covered in blood and vernix. "Jimmy," she whispered, studying his scrunched face. "You're my Jimmy." Tommy arrived 17 minutes later, quieter than his brother, but with eyes that seemed to take in everything around him with suspicious intelligence. Henry was last, smallest of the 3, and he whimpered instead of screamed, like he was apologizing for the trouble he'd caused. "No," Usha told him firmly, pressing her lips to his forehead. "No apologies. You're perfect. All of you are absolutely perfect." They brought all 3 babies to her breast at once, and the sensation of nursing triplets was overwhelming. 3 tiny mouths pulling life from her body, depending on her completely for everything, trusting her with an intensity that felt sacred. The nurse showed her how to position them, how to rotate so everyone got fed, and Usha absorbed the information desperately because there was nobody else to teach her. The hospital social worker visited her room the next morning, concern evident in her careful questions. "The father isn't listed on the birth certificates. Will he be involved in the children's lives?" "There is no father." Usha's voice carried steel. "It's just us. Just me and my boys. Raising triplets alone will be incredibly challenging. Have you considered reaching out to family Or perhaps we can connect you with support services. I have everything we need." Usha held Henry closer, feeling protective fury rise in her chest. "We'll be fine." They released her after 2 days, with 3 car seats, a mountain of instructions, and warnings about postpartum depression that felt like prophecies. Usha carried her sons home to the studio apartment that suddenly seemed impossibly small for 4 people, and the first night alone with them nearly broke her. They cried in rotation, seemingly coordinated to ensure she never slept. Her breasts ached constantly from nursing. Her body felt like it had been torn apart and poorly reassembled. She'd sit on the floor at 3 in the morning, surrounded by crying babies, and wonder if she'd made a terrible mistake trying to do this alone. Then Jimmy would quiet when she sang to him, or Tommy would grip her finger with surprising strength, or Henry would make a sound that was almost like contentment. And she'd remember why she'd chosen this. Chris Scott didn't get to know these perfect miracles. He'd chosen Veronica's ease over Usha's depth, and that decision had cost him everything. Dorothy appeared at her door a week after she came home, arms full of food and determination. "I'm here to help, and I'm not taking no for an answer. I can't pay you. Did I ask for money?" Dorothy pushed past her into the apartment. "Now go take a shower while I handle these beautiful boys." Usha cried in the shower, letting the water wash away the exhaustion and fear she'd been holding inside. When she emerged, Dorothy had all 3 babies, clean and fed, lined up on the couch like little princes. "They're going to be heartbreakers," Dorothy said proudly. "Look at those faces." "They look like their father," Usha admitted quietly. "They look like themselves. Don't you dare give that man credit for their beauty." Dorothy fixed her with a stern look. "You made these babies. You're keeping them alive. They're yours, not his." Dorothy's nephew Lawrence visited soon after, bringing his wife Miriam, who immediately fell in love with the triplets. "You're not doing this alone anymore," Miriam declared. "We're family now." The partnership with Lawrence transformed Usha's life. She'd worked during the boys' naps, analyzing potential investments with a clarity that surprised even herself, and Lawrence would implement her strategies with growing confidence. Within 6 months, they'd turned the struggling firm around completely, and within another 6 months, they were competing with major players. "Your instincts are incredible," Lawrence told her during a meeting. "You see things I've missed my entire career." "I see what desperation looks like," Usha corrected him. "I know what it means to need someone to believe in you when nobody else will." She made a policy of investing in overlooked founders, women, immigrants, people who looked like her and understood struggle intimately. Traditional investors called her portfolio risky, but her returns proved them wrong again and again. She had a gift for identifying genuine passion and commitment, for separating dreamers from builders. The triplets grew rapidly, hitting milestones that filled Usha with pride and terror in equal measure. Jimmy was thoughtful, observing everything before acting. Tommy was fearless, climbing before he could walk properly, charming everyone with his smile. Henry was sensitive, crying when his brothers cried, offering his toys to other children who seemed sad. "You're raising good men," Dorothy told her one afternoon, watching Henry comfort a crying toddler at the park. "The world needs more boys like that." Usha's success drew attention from the investment community, and she started receiving invitations to conferences and networking events. She attended selectively, always terrified she'd run into Chris. But he operated in a different sphere. Old money, established firms, the kind of traditional world that rarely noticed upstarts like her. She bought a penthouse in a different city when the triplets turned 2, choosing a building with a doorman and security because she never wanted Chris to accidentally find them. The space was beautiful, but modest compared to what Chris's wealth could have provided. And she took pride in knowing everything was hers, earned through her intelligence and determination, untainted by his money or influence. Lawrence proposed splitting the firm when their visions diverged about expansion strategies. "You want to take bigger risks than I'm comfortable with," he explained. "But I believe in you completely. Let's make this a partnership, not a conflict. Usha bought him out using profits from her equity stakes and loans secured against her growing portfolio, a calculated risk that could have destroyed her if she'd been wrong. She renamed the firm Spence Capital Partners, claiming her identity fully for the first time since leaving Chris. The triplets' third birthday party was small, just Dorothy's extended family and a few neighbors, but it was filled with love and laughter. Usha watched her sons blow out candles together, their identical faces scrunched in concentration, and felt a surge of pride so intense it nearly brought her to tears. "Mama, why don't we have a daddy?" Jimmy asked that night as she tucked them in. The question hit her like a physical blow. Some families have mamas and daddies. Some just have mamas. Some just have daddies. We're a mama family, and that makes us special. "But I want a daddy," Tommy insisted, his lower lip trembling. "Me too," Henry whispered. Usha gathered all three of them close, breathing in their little boy smell of soap and innocence. "I know, babies, I know, but sometimes things don't work out the way we want them to, and we have to make the best of what we have." "Will we ever get a daddy?" Jimmy asked with his characteristic seriousness. "I don't know. Maybe someday. But right now we have each other, and that's pretty wonderful, isn't it?" They accepted her answer because they were young enough to believe her when she said things would be okay. But Usha lay awake that night, wondering if she'd made a mistake keeping Chris from his sons, if her wounded pride had cost her children something irreplaceable. Then she remembered his voice saying it was easier with Veronica, and her resolve hardened again. Chris Scott didn't deserve to be anyone's father. Her boys would grow up strong and loved without him. She'd make sure of it. Chapter 4. The Fortress She Built. 4 years after walking out of Chris Scott's penthouse, Usha had built something extraordinary from the ruins of her broken heart. Spence Capital Partners managed a portfolio worth more than she'd ever dreamed possible, and her name carried weight in investment circles that had once dismissed her as too young, too inexperienced, too different from the men who dominated the field. The triplets were thriving in ways that filled her with complicated pride. Jimmy had started reading on his own, devouring books about space and dinosaurs with an intensity that reminded Usha painfully of Chris's focused intelligence. Tommy was pure chaos wrapped in charm, always climbing things he shouldn't and talking his way out of trouble with a smile that made teachers and strangers alike forgive him instantly. Henry remained her sensitive soul, the one who noticed when she was sad and would climb into her lap without being asked, offering silent comfort. "Mama's tired today," he'd say, patting her cheek with his small hand. "I'll be extra good." She'd hired Philippa Okonkwo as their live-in nanny after interviewing dozens of candidates, drawn to the Nigerian woman's warmth and the wisdom in her eyes. Philippa asked no questions about the children's father, seeming to understand instinctively that some wounds were too deep for casual conversation. "Those boys are your world," Philippa observed one evening after the triplets were asleep. "But you need to have a world beyond them too. When was the last time you did something just for yourself?" "I don't have time for myself." Usha rubbed her tired eyes, studying reports for a potential acquisition. "Everything I do is for them. That's noble, but it's not sustainable." Philippa sat across from her. "They need to see you happy, not just surviving. They need to know women can be whole people, not just mothers." The words stung because they were true. Usha had poured everything into her sons and her company, leaving nothing for personal joy or relationships. She dated occasionally, awkward dinners with men who seemed intimidated by her success or suspicious of her 3 children, and she'd stopped trying after a particularly disastrous evening where her date had suggested her sons needed a father to straighten them out. She'd driven home, furious, hugging her sleeping boys extra tight that night, whispering promises that they were perfect exactly as they were. Her reputation in the investment world continued growing as she identified companies others overlooked. turning struggling startups into industry leaders through strategic guidance and fierce mentorship. She'd been featured in several publications as an emerging force in venture capital, though she'd carefully avoided any interviews that would include photographs, terrified that Chris would see her face and start asking questions. The paranoia felt justified when she learned one of her portfolio companies was being courted for acquisition by Scott Industries. Her hands had trembled reading the proposal, seeing Chris's name on the letterhead, and she'd spent sleepless nights trying to find a way to avoid the inevitable meeting without raising suspicions. "You'll have to face him eventually," Philippa said gently when Usha confided her fears. "This world you've built, it's going to intersect with his. That's not coincidence. You've succeeded in his sphere. I'm not ready. Will you ever be ready?" Philippa touched her hand. "Those boys are going to start asking harder questions soon. Jimmy already wants to know why other kids have fathers, and he doesn't. I tell him we're a different kind of family. And he's smart enough to know that's not a real answer." Philippa's voice was kind but firm. "I'm not saying you need to tell Chris about them. I'm saying you need to figure out what you're going to tell your sons when they're old enough to understand you made a choice." The meeting with Scott Industries was scheduled for a Wednesday morning, and Usha changed her outfit 5 times before settling on a power suit that made her look commanding and untouchable. She practiced her professional voice, rehearsed keeping her expression neutral, and made plans for every possible scenario except the one that actually happened. Chris looked up from his contract review when she walked into the conference room, and the shock on his face was so complete that he stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. For a moment, they simply stared at each other across the polished table, while his associates shifted uncomfortably, sensing tension without understanding its source. He'd aged in visible ways, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, a heaviness in his bearing that suggested burdens she knew nothing about. But he was still beautiful in that careless way some men were, still capable of making her remember nights she'd spent in his arms, believing she was loved. Usha. Her name came out rough, like he hadn't said it in years. "You're the lead investor?" "I am." She forced her voice to remain steady, professional. "Shall we begin the discussion?" The meeting proceeded with excruciating formality as they reviewed valuation and terms, but Usha felt Chris's eyes on her constantly, studying her like she was a puzzle he'd been trying to solve for years. She negotiated aggressively because letting Chris acquire this company on favorable terms felt like surrendering something precious. And by the time they adjourned, without reaching an agreement, the other executives looked exhausted from the tension crackling between them. Chris caught her arm as she was leaving, his touch sending unwanted electricity through her body, despite everything he'd done. "Wait, please, can we talk privately?" Usha pulled away like his hand burned her skin. "There's nothing to discuss. This is purely professional. The hell it is." His voice dropped low enough that only she could hear. "You disappeared 4 years ago without a word. I looked everywhere for you. Do you have any idea what that did to me?" "I don't care what it did to you." She met his eyes with cold fury. "You made your choice. You chose Veronica and her ease over me and my exhausting expectations. I simply made that choice easier for you. That's not what happened. Goodbye, Mr. Scott." She walked away with her head high, ignoring how his voice followed her down the hallway, and didn't let herself cry until she was safely locked in her car in the parking garage. That night, she held her sleeping sons and whispered apologies they couldn't hear, promising them that keeping their father away was protection, not punishment, that she was doing what was best, even if it didn't always feel that way. But Chris's face haunted her dreams, and the desperation in his voice when he'd said her name planted doubts she couldn't afford to let grow. Chapter 5. Collision Course. The encounter with Chris unraveled something carefully contained inside Usha, and she threw herself into work with renewed desperation. She took meetings at impossible hours, expanded her portfolio aggressively, and pushed her team harder than she'd ever pushed before, until her assistant finally confronted her. You're going to burn out completely, Natasha warned, setting down a stack of proposals Usha had requested by morning. When did you last sleep a full night? Sleep is for people who don't have 3 children and an empire to build. Usha rubbed her burning eyes, studying market analyses that blurred together. Your empire will survive if you take a single day off. Natasha crossed her arms. But your sons won't understand why their mother is always too exhausted to play with them. The words hit harder than Usha wanted to admit. The triplets had been asking why she came home so late recently, why she was always on her phone during dinner, why she couldn't come to their school performances anymore. Jimmy had stopped showing her his drawings. Tommy had grown quieter, less exuberant, and Henry cried himself to sleep some nights, though he tried to hide it from her. I'm doing this for them, Usha protested weakly. Are you? Or are you running from something that scared you? Philippa echoed the same concerns that evening after the boys were asleep. I watched you with them tonight. You were physically present, but mentally somewhere else entirely. They feel it, Usha. Children always feel when their parents are unreachable. I saw Chris. The confession burst out before Usha could stop it. At a meeting last week. And he looked at me like I'd betrayed him by disappearing, like I was the one who did something wrong. What did he say? That he'd searched for me. That I had no idea what my leaving did to him. Usha laughed bitterly, as if his pain matters compared to what he did. Maybe his pain does matter. Philippa's voice was gentle. Not more than yours, but alongside it. People can cause terrible hurt and still experience genuine suffering themselves. You're taking his side, Ndeichi. I'm saying that maybe the story is more complicated than you've let yourself believe. Philippa settled into the chair across from her. You heard him say something awful and you left. But did you ever let him explain? There's nothing to explain. Usha felt tears burning behind her eyes. I heard him tell Veronica that being with her was easier, that I was too demanding, too exhausting. What explanation could possibly make that acceptable? None, but explanation and excuse are different things. Philippa reached for her hand. I'm not saying you should forgive him or let him back into your life. I'm saying that carrying this much anger for 4 years is destroying you from the inside out. Chris began appearing everywhere Usha went in the professional world, and she knew it wasn't coincidence. He was deliberately placing himself in her path, forcing interactions she desperately wanted to avoid. At conferences, he'd take the seat next to hers. At industry events, he'd find reasons to strike up conversations that felt too calculated to be spontaneous. You're looking well, he said at a networking reception, his voice carrying an edge of desperation. Success clearly agrees with you. Please don't do this. Usha kept her voice low, aware of curious eyes watching them. We have nothing to say to each other. I have 4 years' worth of things to say to you. Chris moved closer, lowering his voice. About what happened, about why you left, about how I've thought about you every single day since you disappeared. Then you've wasted 4 years. She turned to walk away, but he caught her wrist gently. Veronica lied about everything that night. She got me drunk deliberately, made sure you'd find us. I ended things with her the next morning, and I've regretted letting you walk away every day since. The words should have been satisfying, should have validated everything she'd felt, but instead they just made her angry. So you were drunk. That's your excuse. You were so intoxicated you accidentally slept with my best friend and told her I was exhausting. No, that's not an excuse. It's context. I don't want your context. Usha pulled free of his grip. You made choices. I made mine. We're done. She fled the reception before he could say anything else, but his words followed her home and kept her awake all night. Veronica had orchestrated it. Chris had been searching for her. None of it changed what she'd heard, what she'd seen, but it complicated the neat narrative she'd built around that night. Industry gossip reached her eventually. Chris had married Veronica shortly after Usha disappeared, a rushed wedding that shocked everyone who knew his usual caution about commitment. They'd divorced within 18 months amid bitter fights about money and rumors of continued infidelity. The news twisted something in Usha's chest. Confirmation that Chris had chosen Veronica, had actually committed to the woman who'd destroyed their relationship, even if it hadn't lasted. A charity gala provided no escape when Usha arrived to find Chris already there, and this time he approached her with determined purpose. "I know you hate me. I know I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me. But please, just give me 5 minutes to explain what really happened that night." "I don't need your explanations," Usha started, but then she heard a familiar voice calling Chris's name across the ballroom. Veronica approached with 2 identical boys clutching her hands, both around 4 or 5 years old with blonde hair and blue eyes that marked them unmistakably as Chris's children. The shock of seeing concrete evidence that Chris had moved on, had built a family with the woman who'd betrayed their friendship, made Usha's vision blur at the edges. "Chris, darling." The boys wanted to say goodnight before their nanny takes them home. Veronica's voice dripped with false sweetness as she registered Usha's presence. "Oh, Usha, how unexpected to see you here." "Hello, Veronica." Usha's voice came out surprisingly steady, considering her heart was threatening to pound out of her chest. "These are our sons, Dominic and Sebastian." Veronica pulled the boys forward possessively. "Say hello to an old friend of Daddy's." The twins looked uncertain, and Usha saw sadness in their young eyes that made her chest ache despite her determination to feel nothing for any child connected to Chris. They were beautiful boys, well-dressed and well-mannered, but something about them suggested loneliness that no amount of privilege could fill. "Hello," Dominic said politely, while Sebastian just stared at his shoes. "It's nice to meet you both." Usha knelt to their eye level, unable to stop herself from offering warmth despite wanting to remain cold. "You're very handsome young men." "Thank you," Sebastian whispered, and his small voice cracked something inside her. Chris looked profoundly uncomfortable with Veronica's presence, his jaw tight with tension, and when Veronica mentioned they were working on reconciliation for the boys' sake, his expression shifted to barely contained fury. "We're not working on anything," he said flatly. "You're manipulating the narrative again, Veronica. Don't be dramatic in front of the children." Veronica's smile never wavered, but her eyes were cold. "We'll discuss this at home. You don't have a home with me. You have a custody arrangement that you consistently violate." Chris's voice carried steel. "Take the boys home. We'll talk about this through our lawyers." Usha excused herself before the situation escalated further, but the image of those sad-eyed twins haunted her as she drove home. Chris had children roughly the same age as the triplets, which meant Veronica had gotten pregnant around the same time Usha had, possibly even before Chris and Usha's relationship had fully ended. The realization made her physically ill. She'd been carrying Chris's children while he'd been fathering different children with her best friend. The overlapping timelines, the parallel pregnancies, the thought that she and Veronica had both been bound to the same man through babies growing simultaneously. It was too much. She checked on the triplets when she got home, watching them sleep peacefully in their shared room. Jimmy had his arm thrown over Tommy, and Henry was curled against Jimmy's back, and they looked so perfect, so innocent, that Usha felt her chest constrict with protective love, so fierce it was almost painful. "I'm sorry your father has other children," she whispered to her sleeping sons. "I'm sorry his life is so complicated, but you'll never have to compete for his love, because you'll never know him existed in the first place." The promise felt hollow, even as she made it, because Dominic and Sebastian's sad eyes kept appearing in her mind, and she couldn't shake the feeling that secrets this big eventually destroyed everyone they touched. Chapter 6. Parallel Worlds Colliding. The days following the gala were torture, as Usha tried to focus on anything besides the image of Chris's twin sons and the sad resignation in their young eyes. She'd built her entire life around protecting her triplets from rejection, from knowing their father had chosen someone else over their mother. But seeing Dominic and Sebastian made her question everything. A major acquisition opportunity presented itself that required Spence Capital and Scott Industries to partner or lose the deal to competitors, and Usha's board pressured her relentlessly to accept. Walking away from this would cost us tens of millions, her CFO argued during an emergency meeting. Your personal history with Chris Scott cannot dictate business decisions of this magnitude. My personal history is none of your concern. It becomes our concern when it threatens the company. He leaned forward. Whatever happened between you two, put it aside for the sake of everyone who depends on this firm. Usha agreed, because she had no choice, but the prospect of working closely with Chris filled her with dread. Their first official partnership meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, and she arrived early to establish control of the space, arranging herself at the head of the conference table with her files spread in a display of territorial dominance. Chris arrived alone, and the dark circles under his eyes suggested he'd been sleeping as poorly as she had. "Thank you for agreeing to this partnership," he said formally, taking the seat across from her rather than next to her. "I know it's not what you wanted. Let's just get through this professionally." Usha opened her laptop, grateful for the barrier it provided. "I've drafted preliminary terms." They worked through the morning with painful formality, both of them hyper-aware of the other's presence, and the tension was thick enough that even the associates who joined them later seemed uncomfortable. Everything was proceeding smoothly until Chris's phone rang with a call he clearly couldn't ignore. "I'm so sorry. I have to take this." He stepped into the hallway, and Usha could hear his voice rising with panic through the closed door. When he returned, his face had drained of all color. "I need to go. Dominic is being rushed to the hospital. He's having trouble breathing." "Go." Usha gestured toward the door. "We can reschedule." She told herself she was going to the hospital purely for professional reasons, that a partner's family emergency required at minimum a gesture of support. But the truth was that she couldn't stop thinking about those sad-eyed twins and the fear in Chris's voice. She found him in the pediatric waiting room, looking more terrified and vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. His eyes filled with gratitude when he saw her. "You didn't have to come." "I know." She sat beside him, maintaining careful distance. "What happened?" "Asthma attack that spiraled into something worse. The doctors think..." His voice broke. "They're saying Veronica hasn't been giving him his medications properly. She's been more focused on her social calendar than monitoring which twin needs what treatment." "Where is she?" "Not answering her phone. Not responding to texts. Probably at some spa or lunch with friends, while our son..." He couldn't finish the sentence. Sebastian sat in Chris's lap, trembling with fear for his brother, and Usha found herself reaching out instinctively to comfort the little boy. "Your brother's going to be okay. The doctors here are very good at helping children feel better." Sebastian looked at her with desperate hope. "Promise?" "I promise they're doing everything they can." She smoothed his hair back gently. "What's your favorite thing about Dominic?" "He always shares his toys with me, even his special ones." Sebastian's lip trembled. "And he makes up stories at bedtime when I'm scared." "He sounds like a wonderful brother." "He is." Sebastian's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want him to die." "He's not going to die, sweetheart." Usha pulled the little boy into her arms before she could think better of it. "He's going to be fine." The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness as they waited for updates. Chris made phone calls trying to locate Veronica, his voice growing harder with each unanswered attempt, and Usha kept Sebastian distracted with stories and quiet games. When a nurse finally came out to tell them Dominic was stable and they could visit, Chris's relief was so profound he actually swayed on his feet. "Thank you for staying," he said quietly as they walked toward Dominic's room. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." Usha kept her voice neutral, unwilling to examine too closely why she'd felt compelled to stay. Dominic looked small and fragile in the hospital bed. Oxygen tubes running to his nose, monitors beeping steadily. His face lit up when he saw Sebastian and Chris, then registered surprise when he noticed Usha. "You're the nice lady from the party," he said, his voice raspy from the breathing treatments. "I am. How are you feeling?" "Better. The doctors gave me medicine that tastes bad but helps me breathe." He studied her with surprising intensity for such a young child. "Are you going to be our new mom? Our old mom doesn't like us very much." The words hit Usha like a physical blow, and she saw Chris's face crumble with pain and guilt. "Your mom loves you very much," she managed to say, though the lie tasted bitter. "No, she doesn't." Sebastian's voice was matter-of-fact. "She tells us we're too much work all the time." Chris pulled both boys close, and Usha could see him struggling not to cry in front of his sons. "I love you both more than anything in the world. Never doubt that." "We know, Daddy," Dominic patted his father's cheek, "but we want a mom who loves us too." Usha excused herself before the emotion overwhelmed her completely, and Chris followed her into the hallway. "I'm sorry they said that to you. They don't understand how inappropriate. They're children who don't feel loved by their mother." Usha's voice was raw. "Don't apologize for their honesty. Veronica never wanted to be a mother." Chris leaned against the wall, exhaustion written across his features. "She wanted to trap me into marriage, and the boys were just the means to that end. I knew it before I married her, but I thought maybe if I tried hard enough, she'd grow to love them. But you can't force that kind of transformation. Why did you marry her?" The question burst out before Usha could stop it. "Because you were gone, and I was drowning in guilt, and my family was pressuring me to settle down. Veronica was pregnant, and marrying her seemed like the right thing to do, even though I knew it was wrong." He met her eyes. "I've made so many mistakes, Usha, but loving my sons isn't one of them, and loving you wasn't either. Walking away from you was the mistake. Letting Veronica manipulate me into betraying you was the mistake. But everything that came before that moment was real. I can't do this." Usha backed away, shaking her head. "I can't hear this right now." "When can you hear it? When will you let me explain what really happened?" "Maybe never." She turned toward the elevator. "Take care of your sons, Chris. They need you right now more than I ever did." She made it to her car before the tears came, great heaving sobs that she muffled against her steering wheel. The pain wasn't about Chris anymore, or even about the betrayal that had happened 4 years ago. It was about Dominic and Sebastian, 2 little boys who reminded her painfully of her own sons, who deserved love and stability and were getting neither from the mother who'd brought them into the world. When she got home, she held Jimmy, Tommy, and Henry extra tight, breathing in their little boy scent, feeling their solid warmth against her body. "I love you," she whispered fiercely. "No matter what happens, no matter what you ever learn, I love you more than anything in this world." "We love you too, Mama," Henry said, pulling back to study her face. "Why are you crying?" "Because sometimes grown-ups cry when they're feeling a lot of feelings all at once." "What kind of feelings?" Jimmy asked, with his characteristic need to understand everything. "Sad feelings and happy feelings and scared feelings all mixed together." She kissed each of their foreheads. "But mostly grateful feelings, because I have you 3. "We're grateful for you too," Tommy said, wrapping his arms around her neck. "You're the best mama in the whole world." The words should have comforted her, but instead they made her cry harder, because her sons didn't know they had a father who might love them if he knew they existed. And Dominic and Sebastian had a father who clearly adored them, but couldn't protect them from a mother who saw them as inconveniences. Philippa found her later that evening, still sitting in the boys' room watching them sleep. "What happened today?" Usha told her everything, the hospital, the twins' heartbreaking honesty, Chris's admission that his marriage had been a mistake. The way Dominic and Sebastian's pain had cracked something inside her she'd thought was safely sealed. "You're going to have to tell him eventually," Philippa said gently. "Not because he deserves to know, but because your boys deserve to make their own choices about their father once they're old enough. What if he hurts them the way he hurt me? What if he doesn't? What if he loves them the way he clearly loves Dominic and Sebastian?" Philippa touched her shoulder. Keeping them from him was self-protection, and that was valid when they were babies. But they're growing up, and this secret is going to eat you alive. I'm not ready. You may never be ready. But that doesn't mean it isn't time. Usha had no response to that, because deep down she knew Philippa was right. The secret had already begun destroying her, and watching Chris's desperate love for his other sons had made it impossible to keep pretending he'd be a terrible father to the triplets. But she wasn't ready to give him that chance. Wasn't ready to risk her sons' hearts on a man who'd once found their mother exhausting. Not yet. Chapter 7. The walls begin to crumble. Chris texted her the next morning with an update on Dominic, stable and improving, though the doctors wanted to keep him another night for observation. Usha told herself not to respond, that maintaining distance was crucial, but found herself typing back anyway, asking how Sebastian was handling everything. The partnership required daily contact, and their conversations began drifting beyond purely professional topics into dangerous, personal territory. Chris talked about the custody battle he was waging against Veronica, the evidence he was gathering of her neglect, the therapist he'd hired to help his sons process having a mother who couldn't love them properly. I failed them by choosing her, he admitted during a coffee meeting that was supposed to be about contract negotiations. I knew she was wrong for me, wrong for any family, but I made the choice anyway because I was trying to prove something to myself. Prove what? Usha heard herself asking, drawn in despite her best intentions, that I could commit to someone, that I wasn't my father, who left every relationship the moment it got complicated. Chris stared into his cup. My dad always said marriage was a trap for ambitious men, that emotional attachment made you weak. When things got serious with you, when I started imagining forever, I panicked. I sabotaged us because being vulnerable with you terrified me more than anything else in my life. So you slept with my best friend to prove you weren't afraid? The bitterness in her voice was impossible to hide. I got blackout drunk because I was terrified of how much I needed you, and Veronica took advantage of that vulnerability. She'd been making comments for months about how you were too good for me, how I'd eventually hurt you, and that night she seemed to prove herself right. He met her eyes. I'm not making excuses. Being drunk doesn't absolve me of responsibility, but I never made a conscious choice to betray you. I woke up the next morning horrified by what had happened, and I ended things with Veronica immediately. But then you married her, because she told me she was pregnant, and my therapist has helped me understand I was trying to repair the damage I'd caused by committing to someone else. Punishment disguised as responsibility. Chris's laugh was bitter. Marrying Veronica was me trying to prove I could follow through on commitment, even to the wrong person. It was spectacular self-destruction. The conversation left Usha unsettled because Chris's explanations were uncomfortably plausible. She wanted him to be a simple villain, but he kept revealing himself as a complicated, damaged person who'd made terrible choices from a place of fear rather than malice. Their working relationship deepened over the following weeks, and Usha found herself looking forward to their meetings in ways that felt treacherous. Chris was different now, more present, more thoughtful, quicker to admit when he was wrong. He asked about her day with genuine interest and remembered small details she mentioned in passing. And the walls around her heart developed hairline cracks every time he did something unexpectedly kind. He sent her an article about supporting children through trauma because she'd mentioned the triplets had nightmares sometimes. He remembered she preferred her coffee with oat milk and had it waiting when she arrived for meetings. He asked follow-up questions about problems she'd shared the previous week, demonstrating he actually listened rather than just waiting for his turn to talk. "You're different," she told him one afternoon, the words escaping before she could stop them. "I'm trying to be the person I should have been 4 years ago." His gaze was steady, unflinching. "Therapy has helped me understand patterns I was repeating from my childhood. I'm learning how to be emotionally present, how to not run when things get difficult. It's too late for us." But her voice lacked conviction. "I know. I'm not doing this to win you back, Usha. I'm doing it because becoming someone worthy of having loved you is the least I owe us both." The joint venture succeeded spectacularly, exceeding all projections, and their professional partnership became the talk of the industry. People commented on their chemistry, the way they anticipated each other's thoughts, how they worked together like they'd been doing it for decades rather than months. Philippa noticed Usha smiling at her phone when Chris texted, "You're falling for him again." "I'm not. The denial was automatic. You're allowed to, you know. People can change. He seems to have done real work on himself. The boys need you to be happy, not just their mother." Philippa's voice was gentle but firm. "They watch you, and they see someone who never lets herself feel joy. Is that really what you want to teach them about life?" The triplets' 5th birthday was approaching, and Usha planned an elaborate celebration despite her exhaustion. She'd invited Philippa's extended family, the neighbors the boys played with, and ordered enough food to feed twice as many people because she wanted everything to be perfect. The morning of the party, Jimmy found a photo album Usha thought she'd hidden in the back of her closet. He climbed onto her bed holding it, his small face serious. "Mama, who is this man in the pictures with you?" Usha's heart stopped. The album was from her time with Chris, photos she'd kept despite knowing she should throw them away. "That's someone I knew a long time ago. Is he our daddy?" Tommy appeared in the doorway, drawn by some mysterious triplet sense that something important was happening. "Why don't we have a daddy like other kids?" Henry's voice was soft, but the question cut through Usha like a blade. She gathered all 3 of them close, her mind racing for answers that wouldn't be lies but wouldn't reveal truths she wasn't ready to share. "Sometimes people's lives are complicated. Your daddy, he didn't know about you when you were born, and I made choices about that. Did he not want us?" Henry's eyes filled with tears. "No, baby. He never got the chance to know about you to make that choice." The half-truth felt like choking. "It's not that he didn't want you. He just didn't know you existed. Could we meet him?" Jimmy studied the photo with intense focus. "Could we tell him we exist now? Maybe someday?" Usha kissed their foreheads, breathing through the panic. "But right now we need to get ready for your party, okay?" They accepted her answer, because they still trusted her completely. But Usha saw new questions forming in their intelligent eyes, and she knew her time for maintaining secrets was running out. The party was in full swing, children running everywhere, Philippa's family laughing loudly in the kitchen, music playing from speakers when the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Usha opened it to find Chris standing in her hallway holding a gift bag and wearing a confused expression. "I'm so sorry to intrude." He looked genuinely bewildered. "Dominic and Sebastian insisted I bring a present for the triplets they heard me mention during a phone call. I was on speaker when you and I were discussing weekend logistics, and they overheard your boys' names. They've been begging to meet them, talking about how they could be friends. I tried to explain that we're business associates and it would be inappropriate, but they wouldn't stop asking. So I thought I'd just drop this off." His voice trailed into shocked silence as 3 identical boys raced past Usha, shouting about birthday cake. And she watched his face as his brain processed what he was seeing. 1, 2, 3, and the mathematical impossibility of the timeline hit him with devastating force. The gift bag fell from his hands, and the sound of it hitting the floor echoed like a gunshot in the sudden silence. "Chris," Usha started, but Jimmy had already stopped running, had turned to study the strange man in their doorway with intense curiosity. "Are you the lost daddy?" Tommy asked with heartbreaking directness. "Did you finally find us?" Chris's eyes met Usha's, and she saw everything in that moment. Shock, betrayal, wonder, rage, love, grief, all of it crashing over him in waves. His lips moved, trying to form words, but nothing came out. Henry walked slowly back to the doorway, studying Chris with his characteristic seriousness. "You look like us," he observed quietly. "Same eyes, same nose. Are you our daddy?" The question broke whatever paralysis had gripped Chris, and he dropped to his knees right there in the hallway, his eyes filling with tears that spilled down his cheeks unchecked. "Yes," he whispered, his voice breaking on the word. "Yes, I'm your daddy." And Usha watched her carefully constructed world crumble as her sons met their father for the first time, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 8. Truths That Can't Stay Buried. The silence after Chris's confession stretched into something unbearable as Usha watched 5 years of secrets crumble in the space of a heartbeat. The party continued behind her, children laughing, adults chatting, music playing. But the hallway had become its own universe, where time moved differently, where every second felt weighted with consequences that would reshape their lives forever. Jimmy stepped forward first, because he was always the thoughtful one, always the observer who needed to understand before acting. "Why didn't you come find us before?" The question destroyed something in Chris's face, and he looked at Usha with devastation so complete it made her chest hurt despite her fury. "I didn't know you existed. I didn't know your mama was pregnant when she left me. But why did she leave you?" Tommy tilted his head, trying to puzzle out the logic. "If we were inside her, didn't she need you to help?" Your mama left because I hurt her very badly." Chris's voice was raw, honest in a way that surprised Usha. "I made terrible mistakes, and she had every right to go somewhere I couldn't find her." "Did you hit her?" Henry's eyes were wide, terrified. "Teacher says hitting is never okay." "No, baby, nothing like that." Chris reached toward Henry, then stopped himself. "I hurt her heart, not her body. I wasn't a good person back then, and she needed to get away from me." Philippa appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene with swift understanding. "Boys, why don't you come help me with the birthday cake while your mama talks to your daddy?" "But we just met him," Tommy protested. "We've been waiting for him our whole lives. And he'll still be here when you're done with cake," Philippa promised, gently herding them away. "Sometimes grown-ups need to talk about complicated things first." The triplets went reluctantly, looking back over their shoulders at Chris like they were afraid he'd disappear if they stopped watching him. Usha waited until they were out of earshot before turning on Chris with fury that had been building for 5 years. "You don't get to do that. You don't get to walk in here and tell them you're their father and break their hearts when you inevitably disappoint them." "When I disappoint them?" Chris's voice rose, matching her anger. "You kept my children from me for 5 years. You let me have 2 other sons while you were raising 3 I didn't know existed. How dare you talk about broken hearts when you stole mine, without giving me a chance to even know I should be looking for them?" "I heard you." Usha's hands were shaking. "I heard you tell Veronica that being with her was easier, that I was exhausting, that you didn't want the commitment I was demanding. Was I supposed to bring babies into that? Was I supposed to give you 3 more children to resent?" "I would never have resented them." Chris's voice broke. "God, Usha, how could you think? I love being a father. Dominic and Sebastian are the best things in my life, even with all the chaos and difficulty. If you'd told me about the triplets, I would have..." "You would have what? Married me out of obligation like you married Veronica? Made me another mistake you were trying to atone for?" The words hit him like physical blows, and she saw him absorb the impact, saw him understanding how thoroughly his choices had poisoned her faith in anything he might have offered. He sagged against the wall, looking suddenly older, worn down by regrets he couldn't undo. "I can't change the past." His voice was quiet now, defeated. "I can't go back and be the person you needed me to be 5 years ago. But I'm here now, and I just found out I have 3 sons who've been growing up without me. And I need you to understand that no matter how angry you are, no matter how justified your reasons were for leaving, I have rights too." "Rights?" Usha's laugh was bitter. "You want to talk about rights after what you did?" "Yes, Chris straightened, and she saw steel enter his spine. "I want to talk about my right to know my children. My right to be their father now, even if I couldn't be before, because you never told me they existed. I protected them." "From what?" He stepped closer. "From a father who would have loved them desperately. From financial security? From having siblings who could have been part of their lives from the beginning." His voice rose again. "You protected yourself, Usha. Don't pretend this was about them." The accusation stung because part of it was true. She had protected herself from more rejection, from watching Chris choose his other family over their sons, from the particular pain of knowing she wasn't enough to make him stay. But she'd also protected her babies from uncertainty, from divided loyalties, from the chaos that would have come from co-parenting with a man who'd just married another woman. "You married her," Usha said, and her voice cracked despite her attempt to stay strong. "You married Veronica right after I left. You built a family with her. What was I supposed to do? Show up pregnant and beg for scraps of your attention? I married her because she told me she was pregnant and I was trying to do the right thing." Chris ran his hands through his hair, frustrated. "It was the worst decision of my life. The marriage was a disaster from the start because I knew I didn't love her, could never love her the way I loved you." Past tense. Usha latched onto the word. "Loved as in no longer. Present tense." Chris met her eyes. "I've loved you every single day for 5 years. Through the divorce, through dating other people trying to move on, through every goddamn morning I woke up wishing things had gone differently. You're the one who walked away, Usha. I was ready to spend my life with you if you'd just let me explain what happened that night." "I saw what happened. I heard it. You saw Veronica's manipulation and heard my worst moment of self-sabotage." He moved closer, and she could smell his cologne, the same scent he'd worn 5 years ago. "That night was the result of months of her working on my insecurities, telling me I'd never be good enough for you, that I'd eventually hurt you so I might as well get it over with. She knew exactly which wounds to prod, which fears to exploit. That doesn't excuse. I'm not looking for excuses." Chris's voice dropped to something raw and honest. "I'm trying to make you understand that the man you overheard that night was drowning in self-hatred and fear, and he said terrible things he didn't mean because he was terrified of how much he needed you." Usha wanted to stay angry, wanted to maintain the righteous fury that had sustained her for 5 years, but exhaustion was winning. She leaned against the doorframe, suddenly drained of fight. "It doesn't matter anymore. The past is done. We can't undo any of it." "No, but we can figure out the future." Chris gestured toward where the party sounds continued. "Those 3 boys in there are mine as much as they're yours. I want to be their father, Usha. I want to know them, to love them, to be part of their lives. They don't know anything about our history. They don't know about Veronica or Dominic and Sebastian. Then we tell them." Chris's voice was firm. "Age-appropriately, carefully, but honestly. Because secrets this big destroy families, and I won't let that happen to ours. We're not a family. We have 3 children together. We're absolutely a family, just not the traditional kind." He paused. "Dominic and Sebastian are in the car with their nanny. Can they come in? Can all 5 of my sons meet each other?" The request knocked the wind out of Usha's lungs. 5 sons. Chris had 5 sons, and 3 of them didn't know their brothers existed until this moment. She thought about the twins' sadness, their desperate need for a mother who loved them, and made a decision that terrified her. Bring them up. Chris's relief was palpable. He called down to the car, and minutes later Dominic and Sebastian appeared, holding their nanny's hands and looking uncertain. They'd been dressed up for the occasion, though they couldn't have known what they were walking into, and Usha saw they were carrying wrapped presents. "Are these the brothers Daddy told us about?" Dominic asked, his eyes wide. "Brothers?" Sebastian looked confused. "I thought we were meeting friends." Chris knelt between them. "I have something important to tell you both. You know how sometimes families are complicated and people have children in different ways." He waited for their nods. Jimmy, Tommy, and Henry are your brothers. We have the same daddy, me, but different mamas. The twins processed this information with the resilient flexibility of young children who'd already learned their family didn't look like others. So we have more brothers? Dominic's face lit up. That means we're not just two anymore. That's right. Chris's voice was thick with emotion. You're 5. Philippa appeared with the triplets then, and for a moment the 5 boys just stared at each other. 3 identical faces and 2 that looked similar to their father, but different from each other. All of them connected by blood and circumstance, and a man who was just learning he had more family than he'd known. Tommy broke the tension first, because he always did. Do you like superheroes? He asked Dominic. I love superheroes. Dominic's enthusiasm was immediate. My favorite is Spider-Man. Mine too. Tommy grabbed his hand. Come see my room. I have all the toys, just like that. With the effortless acceptance of children who haven't learned to complicate love with conditions, the 5 boys ran off together, leaving the adults standing in the hallway, staring after them in wonder. They'll be okay, Philippa said softly. Children are resilient when adults don't poison them with bitterness. Chris looked at Usha with desperate hope. Can we try to get this right? Not for us, but for them? Usha thought about Dominic and Sebastian's sad eyes at the hospital, about her sons, asking why they didn't have a father, about 5 little boys who deserved better than the mess their parents had made. She thought about Chris reading bedtime stories to his twins with patience and love, about the way he'd dropped to his knees when he'd realized the triplets were his, about the genuine agony in his voice when he'd said he would have loved them if he'd known they existed. Okay, she whispered, but you're going to have to earn their trust. And mine, I know. Chris's smile was tentative, fragile. I'll spend the rest of my life earning it, if that's what it takes. From the bedroom came the sound of children laughing together. Brothers discovering each other for the first time, and Usha felt the first crack in the armor she'd built around her heart 5 years ago. Maybe, just maybe, some broken things could be rebuilt into something even stronger than before. Chapter 9, Truths That Can't Stay Buried. The weeks following the birthday party transformed Usha's carefully controlled life into beautiful chaos, as Chris proved himself through relentless action rather than empty promises. He showed up every morning at 7 to have breakfast with the triplets before they went to school, arriving with their favorite foods and genuine interest in their dreams from the night before. I dreamed I could fly, Tommy announced one morning, and Chris listened with complete attention, asking detailed questions about where he'd flown and what he'd seen, treating the child's imagination like it mattered. Jimmy was cautious with affection, watching Chris with analytical eyes that reminded Usha painfully of herself. Why didn't you come find us before? He asked one afternoon, and Chris sat down at his level to answer honestly. Because I didn't know you existed, and that's something I'll regret for the rest of my life. Every day I missed was a day I can never get back. He touched Jimmy's hand gently. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere ever again unless you want me to. I don't want you to go anywhere. Jimmy's voice was small. I've wanted a daddy my whole life. Chris pulled him close, and Usha watched from the doorway as her oldest son finally let himself cry against his father's shoulder, releasing years of unspoken longing. Chris held him through it, whispering reassurances and promises, and when Jimmy finally pulled back, his face was clear in a way Usha had never seen before. Henry attached himself to Chris with the immediate trust of a child who'd been waiting for this exact person to appear in his life. He'd climb into Chris's lap without invitation, fall asleep against his chest during movie nights, and tell him elaborate stories about things that had happened at school. Confident his father cared about every detail. You're so lucky, he told Dominic during one of their play dates, which had become daily occurrences. You got to have daddy your whole life, but we didn't have a good mama, Dominic said matter-of-factly. You're lucky you have Miss Usha. She's nice to us when we visit. The casual revelation of how the twins viewed their mother broke Usha's heart. She'd started spending time with Dominic and Sebastian during their visits, unable to resist mothering children who so clearly needed it. And they'd responded to her warmth with desperate gratitude that suggested they'd been starved for maternal affection. Chris was building a custody case against Veronica with evidence of neglect that made Usha's blood boil, missed medical appointments, forgotten school events, medication errors that could have been fatal. He'd hired the best lawyers and wasn't backing down, despite Veronica's threats and manipulation. She's trying to turn this into a financial negotiation, Chris told Usha one evening after the children were asleep. Offering to give me primary custody if I increase her settlement. She's trying to sell her own children. Usha's voice was sharp with disgust. She never wanted them. She wanted what they could get her. Chris's jaw tightened. I was such a fool marrying her. I sentenced Dominic and Sebastian to having a mother who sees them as bargaining chips. They have you. That counts for a lot. They deserve better than having me try to compensate for her disinterest. He looked at Usha with something vulnerable in his expression. They love you, you know. They ask about you constantly, talk about how nice you are, how you remember their favorite colors, and ask real questions about their day. They're easy to love. Usha meant it. All 5 of them are extraordinary. Thanks to you. Chris's voice was soft. The triplets are incredible kids, kind, smart, confident. You did that alone when you shouldn't have had to. The praise made her uncomfortable. I did what any mother would do. No, you did something remarkable. You built a business empire while raising triplets by yourself. And you produced 3 boys who are secure and happy despite the challenging circumstances. He paused. I'm in awe of you, Usha. I always have been. She felt the walls around her heart crack a little more, the old wounds healing in ways that terrified her. It was one thing to co-parent professionally, another entirely to feel her feelings for Chris resurfacing after years of carefully suppressed emotion. Their relationship shifted gradually from hostile cooperation to genuine friendship as they navigated the complexities of blended family life. They texted throughout the day about small things. Tommy's tantrum about vegetables, Henry's beautiful drawing, Jimmy's report card. They made decisions together about rules and boundaries, presenting a united front that the children clearly needed. Philippa watched these developments with approval. You're smiling again, really smiling, not just going through the motions. The boys are happy. That makes me happy. It's more than that. Philippa's voice was gentle. You're healing and letting him heal too. That takes courage. Chris was different in ways that felt genuine rather than performed, a transformation that went deeper than surface changes. He talked openly about the therapy he'd been doing for years, the work of unpacking his father's damage and learning healthier patterns of attachment and communication. I was terrified of needing anyone, he admitted during one of their late-night conversations after the boys were asleep. My dad taught me that emotional dependency was weakness, that ambitious men had to stay unattached to succeed. When I fell in love with you, really fell in love, for the first time in my life I panicked. Self-sabotage felt safer than vulnerability. And now, Usha asked, testing the waters, now I know that loving you was the bravest thing I've ever done, and walking away was the most cowardly. He met her eyes. I'm not asking for another chance romantically. I know I destroyed that possibility. But I want you to understand that losing you taught me everything about what matters. And I'm grateful for the lesson, even if I hate how I learned it. The honesty disarmed her more than grand gestures ever could. Chris wasn't trying to win her back with flowers or declarations. He was showing up every day for their sons, co-parenting with respect and genuine partnership, demonstrating through consistent action that he'd done the hard work of becoming someone worthy of trust. The triplets' 5th birthday came and went, replaced by new routines that included 2 families learning to function as one extended unit. Dominic and Sebastian started asking if they could call Usha Mama, and after checking with Chris, she said yes. unable to deny them the maternal love they'd been missing. "You're saving them," Chris told her, his voice rough with emotion. "You're giving them what I couldn't provide. You're providing plenty. They worship you, because I'm their fun parent who shows up for the highlights. You're teaching them what unconditional love looks like." He paused. "I never thanked you for that, for being exactly what they needed when you had every right to turn them away out of loyalty to your sons." Children aren't responsible for their parents' mistakes. Usha touched his hand. All 5 of them deserve love and stability, regardless of how they came into the world. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility that neither was ready to name, and Usha pulled her hand back before the electricity became too much to ignore. They weren't ready for more than friendship, maybe would never be ready, but something was shifting between them that felt inevitable. The custody hearing approached rapidly, and Chris's lawyers were confident they'd win primary custody, given the mountain of evidence against Veronica. The night before court, Chris appeared at Usha's door looking wrecked. "I'm terrified I'll lose them," he admitted. "That some judge will decide they're better off with their mother, regardless of the evidence, and I won't be able to protect them anymore." "You won't lose them." Usha pulled him inside. "Everything you've documented is irrefutable. Veronica has connections, old money, the kind of influence that sometimes matters more than facts." He sank onto her couch. "If I lose custody, if they have to stay with someone who doesn't love them, you're not going to lose." Usha sat beside him. "And if the worst happens, we'll figure it out together. You're not alone in this." Chris looked at her with desperate gratitude. "How are you so generous after everything I did to you?" "Because holding on to bitterness was destroying me, and because our sons deserve parents who can work together without toxicity poisoning everything." She took his hand. "We're building something new here, and it's not perfect, but it's ours." He squeezed her fingers. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, maybe not, but the boys deserve to see what healthy co-parenting looks like, and I'm choosing that over my wounded pride." The custody hearing resulted in victory. Chris was awarded primary custody, with Veronica receiving supervised visitation only. Her neglect and manipulation documented thoroughly enough that even her expensive lawyers couldn't counter the evidence. Dominic and Sebastian moved into Chris's home officially, and their relief at no longer having to pretend their mother loved them was heartbreaking and liberating simultaneously. "We can just be us now," Sebastian told Usha. "We don't have to worry about making her mad anymore." The 5 boys became inseparable, developing their own language and rituals, and watching them together made Usha's chest ache with complicated emotions. Jimmy took his role as oldest seriously, even though he was only minutes older than his identical brothers, protecting all 4 of his siblings with fierce loyalty. Tommy was the chaos agent who got everyone into trouble, while Henry was the peacemaker who smoothed over conflicts. Dominic and Sebastian brought their own dynamics. Dominic was the brave one who tried everything first, and Sebastian was cautious but deeply thoughtful, asking questions that revealed surprising emotional intelligence for a child his age. They were building a family from broken pieces, and against all odds, it was working. Chapter 10. The Empire She Built from His Ashes. 6 months after Chris discovered the triplets, Usha stood in her penthouse, watching all 5 boys sprawled across the living room floor, building an elaborate fort, and felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. The apartment had transformed into organized chaos, toys everywhere, art projects covering the refrigerator, school schedules and activities coordinating 5 children's lives, plastered on whiteboards. Chris sat on the floor with them, helping secure blankets to chair backs and taking architectural suggestions from 5 competing voices with patient good humor. He caught her watching and smiled, the expression transforming his face into something younger, freer, and her heart did a complicated flip that she'd stopped trying to suppress. "Mama!" "Come help us," Henry called, and she joined them on the floor, letting herself be pulled into their imaginative world where blanket forts were castles and stuffed animals were dragons requiring elaborate rescue missions. Philippa appeared with snacks, shaking her head fondly at the mess. "You've come a long way from the woman who left that penthouse 5 years ago, carrying secrets and a broken heart. Everything I built from those broken pieces." Usha accepted juice boxes to distribute. "The empire I created was supposed to prove I didn't need him, but it turns out I was just proving I could survive anything." And now, Philippa's smile was knowing. "Now I'm learning that surviving isn't the same as living." She watched Chris tickle Tommy until the little boy shrieked with laughter. "I thought protecting my heart meant keeping everyone out. But maybe it means being brave enough to let people earn their way back in." The custody victory over Veronica had freed Chris and the twins from constant manipulation. Though the supervised visits remained tense and uncomfortable, Veronica showed up more interested in documenting perfect photos for social media than actually engaging with her sons. And Dominic and Sebastian had stopped pretending they enjoyed seeing her. "Do we have to go to Mom's?" Dominic asked before one visit, his voice small. "Can't we just stay with you and Mama Usha?" The casual use of Mama Usha still made Usha's heart clench, but Chris handled it with his characteristic honesty. "The court says you need to spend some time with her. But remember, this is her last chance to show she wants to be a real mom to you. If she doesn't do better, we can ask the judge to change the arrangement." "She won't do better." Sebastian's matter-of-fact assessment was devastating. "Oh, she doesn't know how." Chris pulled both boys close. "Then we keep being the family we've built. You, me, your brothers, and Mama Usha. Nothing can change that." The boys accepted this with resilient pragmatism, understanding that adults sometimes failed children through no fault of the children themselves. Usha had been working with all 5 of them to process their complicated family dynamics, explaining age-appropriately that families came in many forms and love was what mattered, not matching the picture books. Chris had restructured his entire life to prioritize his sons, delegating work responsibilities and establishing firm boundaries about family time. He coached their soccer league, attended every school performance, and showed up for the mundane moments that actually mattered. Homework help, bedtime routines, negotiating sibling conflicts with patience. Usha would have sworn he didn't possess 5 years ago. "You're really good at this," she told him one evening after a particularly chaotic dinner where spaghetti had ended up everywhere except in mouths. "Being their dad, I mean. I have excellent motivation." Chris wiped sauce off Henry's face. "Every day with them is a day I almost didn't get because of my own stupidity. I don't take any of it for granted." The partnership between them had evolved into something deeper than co-parenting, a genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared purpose. They talked late into the night after the boys were asleep, sharing fears and victories, and Usha found herself looking forward to those conversations as much as she looked forward to time with her sons. "I've been thinking," Chris said during one of those talks, his voice careful, "about what comes next for us." Usha's heart rate picked up. "What do you mean?" "I mean that we've built something functional and healthy here, and I don't want to jeopardize that by pushing for more than you're ready for." He met her eyes. "But I'd be lying if I said I didn't hope that someday, when you're ready, we might try being us again." "Chris, I'm not asking for an answer now. I'm not even asking for an answer this year." His voice was steady. "I'm just saying that I've loved you every day for 5 years, and finding out about the triplets didn't change that. It deepened it. Watching you mother not just our sons, but Dominic and Sebastian too, seeing your generosity and strength, understanding what you built alone while I was making mistakes with Veronica. You're extraordinary, Usha, and I want to be worthy of that. You're already proving yourself worthy." The words came out quietly. "Every day you show up, every time you put the boys first, every moment you demonstrate you're different from who you were. It matters." But is it enough? The vulnerability in his voice cracked something open inside her. "I don't know yet." Honesty felt crucial. "I'm still healing from what happened. I'm still learning to trust that this version of you is permanent, not temporary. But I'm not close to the possibility anymore." "That's something. That's everything." Chris's smile was tentative, hopeful. "I'll wait as long as you need. Forever, if that's what it takes." The conversation hung between them for weeks, acknowledged but not pursued, a possibility they were both protecting carefully. Philippa noticed the change in dynamic, the way Usha's eyes followed Chris when he wasn't looking, how his hand would linger on her shoulder when he passed behind her chair. "You're falling in love with him again," Philippa observed. "Or maybe you never stopped." "Maybe I never did." Usha watched Chris read bedtime stories to all 5 boys piled in one bed. Their identical faces, or almost identical in the twins' case, rapt with attention. But loving someone and trusting them are different things. He's earned the trust, though. "Look at him," Philippa gestured toward the bedroom. "That man is showing up every single day, doing the hard, boring work of parenting, putting 5 children ahead of his own comfort and convenience. That's not performance. That's character." The triplets' 6th birthday approached, and Chris proposed a joint party with Dominic and Sebastian since their birthdays were close together. One big celebration for all 5 of them. They're brothers. They should celebrate together. The party was beautiful chaos, children everywhere. Laughter and games, all 5 boys blowing out candles together and making wishes Usha hoped would come true. She caught Chris's eyes across the cake, and something electric passed between them. An acknowledgement of how far they'd come from that devastating moment in his hallway when everything had changed. Later, after guests had left and the boys were finally asleep, Chris found her cleaning up in the kitchen. "Thank you for letting me be part of this, for letting me be their father, even though I didn't earn it." "You're earning it every day." Usha set down the plate she was washing. "The boys adore you, all of them, because you made that possible. You could have poisoned them against me, made it impossible for us to co-parent, but you chose the harder path of letting them love me freely." He moved closer. "I don't know how to thank you for that. You don't need to thank me. You're their father. They deserve to know you. I destroyed us once because I was terrified of how much I needed you." Chris's voice was soft. "I'm not that person anymore. I've done years of work to understand my fears and patterns. I'm not asking you to take a chance on who I was. I'm asking if someday you might consider taking a chance on who I've become." Usha looked at the man standing in her kitchen and saw not the boy who'd betrayed her 5 years ago, but someone who'd walked through fire and emerged transformed. She saw a father who read bedtime stories with patience, who negotiated sibling conflicts with wisdom, who showed up for every school event and doctor's appointment and quiet moment that mattered more than grand gestures ever could. "I'm not ready yet," she said honestly, "but I'm getting closer." "Then I'll keep proving myself," Chris smiled. "For as long as it takes. What if it takes forever? Then I'll love you forever while I wait." He touched her cheek gently. "You and our boys are worth any amount of patience." The kiss happened gradually, neither of them sure who initiated it. A soft meeting of lips that carried years of complicated history and tentative hope for the future. It felt like coming home after a long journey, familiar but changed, carrying weight and possibility in equal measure. "Is this okay?" Chris pulled back to search her face. "Yes." Usha surprised herself with the answer. "This is okay." They took things slowly after that, rebuilding trust through consistent presence rather than rushing into declarations neither was ready for. Chris continued showing up for their sons, proving through relentless action that his transformation was genuine, and Usha let herself soften gradually. The armor around her heart finally coming down. The triplets noticed the change between their parents. "Are you and Daddy going to get married?" Jimmy asked one morning, his perceptive eyes missing nothing. "We're taking things one day at a time," Usha answered carefully, "making sure we're building something solid for all of us." "I want you to get married," Henry said firmly. "Then we'd be a real family altogether." We're already a real family, Chris corrected gently. Families aren't defined by marriage certificates. They're defined by love and commitment. And we absolutely have both of those. The boys accepted this with their usual resilience, secure in knowing they were loved, even if their family didn't match traditional patterns. They stopped asking when things would become official, content in the knowledge that their parents were building something permanent, even if it looked different from other families. Usha's empire continued growing. Spence Capital Partners now managed a portfolio worth hundreds of millions. Her strategy of investing in overlooked founders, generating returns that made even traditional firms take notice. But she'd learned to balance ambition with presence, making sure she was there for school plays and soccer games, for quiet moments and loud celebrations. On the anniversary of the day, Chris discovered the Triplets. They gathered all 5 boys for a family meeting. "We want to talk to you about what comes next," Chris began, and 5 pairs of eyes fixed on him with interest. "Your dad and I have been working hard to build a family that works for everyone," Usha continued. "We're not perfect and our story is complicated, but what matters is that we love all of you completely." "We know that," Dominic said. "You both show us every day." "That's exactly right," Chris smiled. "And we want to make sure that never changes, no matter what else shifts in our lives." "Are you moving in together?" Tommy asked with his characteristic directness. "We're talking about it," Usha admitted. "How would everyone feel about that?" The response was immediate and enthusiastic. 5 voices talking over each other about who would share rooms, whether they could get a dog, if they could paint the walls in the new house. Their excitement was infectious, and Usha felt the last remaining ice around her heart finally melt. Maybe forgiveness wasn't something you gave all at once, but something you built through choice and action, day after day, until suddenly you realized you were standing in the future you'd been afraid to hope for. Maybe families weren't born perfect. They were built from broken pieces, transformed through love and commitment into something stronger than what came before. As she watched Chris field questions from 5 excited boys, explaining logistics and promising family decisions about the new house, Usha understood that the empire she'd built from the ashes of their destroyed relationship had given her something more valuable than professional success. It had given her the strength to believe in second chances, the courage to risk her heart again, and the wisdom to know that love without trust was just pretty words. But trust rebuilt through consistent action was foundation strong enough to last forever.